So let's bring in Republican Senator Cramer from North Dakota, who, by the way, has been in public service for a couple of decades, a strong proponent of free markets. But Senator Cramer, you know, this big economic rebound that we're seeing is beginning to slow. I'm very concerned that Congress not getting the message. So is there a chance, is there still potential for a fiscal financial package?
Well, first of all, Charles, I think that the fact that the Democrats not only rejected the most recent offering, they rejected the possibility of even debating it. That's a pretty big problem. If their position is we want nothing because we like the issue, then we have a problem. That said, I would tell you that I do believe that there's still a possibility. I think what the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House is doing, it could get some traction. There's clearly some political pressure being applied both from home and then from the members to the leadership, particularly Speaker Pelosi. Clearly, it would be a package bigger than the one that the Republicans tried to put forward 1 week ago today in the Senate that the Democrats rejected, but much smaller than what the Speaker is offering. I think the dilemma is more among leaders than it is among the rank and file members.
And you know, it's interesting to me is that I understand the debt levels and all of these things we traditionally really worry about, but I've also had a lot of frustration with GOP lawmakers that keep saying they don't want to pay people not to work. I agree with that 1,000%, but you know, the long-term damage to society are just so much different than in normal times. Think about this. Back in February, there were more than 1 million jobs than there were unemployed people, right? So you had 7.5 million, just 5.5 million people out there in the workforce. It's all changed now. We've got 7 million more people than we do jobs. How come something like that is not creating a greater sense of urgency?
You know, I don't know why, except that maybe people aren't hearing enough from the constituents, or the proximity to the next election is such that there's another agenda at play here, and I think that's what it is. I think the other agenda is the crisis serves Democrats better than the solution, and so they don't want to play ball with us. Now, all of that said, I agree we don't want to pay people more not to work than to work, but if people can't work because of the imposition of the government's positions on their particular industry or job, they ought to at least get some help, because supply of money, discretionary money in the economy is not an unimportant part, even to a market-based economy in a crisis. So I agree with you. I think we ought to still try to find some common ground somewhere.
You've mentioned Nancy Pelosi, and to your point, she says she's trying to get the Democrats together. And Democrats even, sort of said, listen, they're not really that interested. Some of them have. But I also feel that maybe she's more concerned with crafting this public relations message that you've talked about than finding a real serious middle ground. So if that's the case, how do we get around this? I'm afraid, honestly, that the economic data has to get a lot worse. The stock market's got to go down a lot more before we can get the leadership, really, specifically Nancy Pelosi, to come up with the deal, which, by the way, I'm telling you right now, it's going to be $1.5 trillion. I said it from day one. It's going to be something like that when it happens. I just worry it's going to be too late. Sir, final word to you.
Well, you make a lot of sense there, Charles, and I think you're right. It would be closer to $1.5 trillion than say three-quarters, say $750 billion, maybe a little around a trillion. One of the things I think conservatives ought to find some console in is that in the Republican package, the targeted package, we did find $350 billion of unused CARES package money. In other words, we're trying to do this with the least amount of damage to the long term, that is to say the debt and the deficit, while also acknowledging we also have a virus we're fighting here. So look, I think it's going to be rank and file members that get this done, if it gets done at all, but they're going to have to hear from folks back home. And you talked about the airline industry. There's one where a lot of people see the airline industry as just a bunch of executives and shareholders. And the reality is, when you look at the entire supply chain of the airline industry, that is an industry that needs some specific help, because you can't, without airlines, you can't do lots of things.
Yeah. That's true. Senator, I've always appreciated your honesty in our conversations, and I appreciate you taking the time.
It's always my pleasure. Thanks, Charles.